Again, great to see members of the gallery there coming along. Good to see you here every month. We'll begin with the acknowledgement, and I'll hand over to Councillor Devereux.
We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land, Kabi Kabi, on which this event is taking place. We would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their ongoing connection to the land, sea and community. We pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. We also extend that respect to all other people present. Thank you.
You're right on time there. I've hit the bell. Great. We'll hand over now. Sorry, I forgot. Ben, who will lead us with a few words of wisdom and then in prayer. So,
I'm Ben. I'm Gympie Baptist, and at Gympie Baptist at the moment we're working through a book of the Bible called Deuteronomy. And I know that sounds like an ancient and foreign kind of name, but it's actually really struck me as we've been working through it. As you look at it, it might look like a bunch of ancient laws, but what's really struck me is how it shows that God is a God who really wants people to live, to prosper and do well. I mean, it starts off talking about how God saw that there were a whole people group who were living, who were stuck in a really bad place, and he saved them out of that. And then he brought them to a new place and set them up, giving them everything that they needed to live, and not just survive, but truly to live. And to this people who he saved and gave them a new place, he gave them this book of Deuteronomy, which was telling them ultimately how that they could live fullness of life in this new place that he gave them. And not just for them, but for their children and their grandchildren and their grandchildren's children and so on. And not just for their own people group, but they were put there so that other people could see them living the kind of life that's really worth living, and then join in them as well to enjoy that with them. So in Deuteronomy, God also tells them the kind of things that will lead them down a path that they don't want to go, so they never have to go down there and find out these things the hard way, because he wants everybody to live, and I mean to truly live. And as it's summing up, God says through this book in Deuteronomy, "Behold, I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. So choose life, so that you and your descendants might live." Because that's the kind of God he is. He's not a big cosmic good works counter who's overjoyed when we do something wrong so he can whack us for it. He's the God who wants to set us up to truly live while we're here in this world, to have hope and joy and peace and love in the deepest places of our hearts, no matter what this life throws at us. And that's a key reason why Jesus was sent into the world, to live and to die and rise again. Because God is a God like that. So it's a joy to pray this morning. Ask that God will bless this region, because I know it's a prayer that he loves to answer. So please pray with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are a God who wants us to live. Not just survive, but live the kind of life that's really worth living. Not to be overcome by darkness, but to have real hope for the future. Not to be overcome by despair, but to have resilient joy. Not to be overcome by fear and anxiety, but to be filled, heart and soul, with peace. And not to be overcome by evil, but to be able to overcome evil with love. We pray that you would be at work to bring light into the darkness that people feel in our region. And today, we ask that you'd empower us to do what we can to achieve that. So may there be true well-being in our region, and may this region and the people in it truly flourish and thrive. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
If we can all rise, we'll have 1 minute silence to remember and contemplate the deceased residents of our region, and it's probably pertinent that we extend our thoughts out to the McIntyre family, who's the passing of former Councillor Bill McIntyre recently. I know it will be weighing heavily on the family, and we extend our appreciation for his service to the community, and our thoughts go out to the family. Thank you. Disclosure of interest, councillors. Anyone with Councillor Jensen?
7.2, I'm a member of the Levine Hall Committee. I'd like to say a meeting there.
Anyone else? Councillor Milne?
Possibly 8.1. I'm still getting some confirmation on information.
Anyone else? We have an apology from Councillor Fredman and I believe Councillor Polly. We have an application for a leave of absence from Councillor Jensen. We have that recommendation up there. So we have in section 2, Councillor Jensen wishes to apply for a leave of absence from the 1st of October till the
15th of October to the
15th
26th.
to the 26th. Someone to move? Councillor Devereux, Councillor Fern, second. All those in favour? Carried.
Was that 15th?
15th.
Yeah, it just says 19th up there, that's all.
Righto.
It doesn't matter, so I'm going to miss the meeting.
Yeah.
Sorry, is it 15?
Can we just change it to
Yeah, just-
15th, please? Thank you.
I have a pencil.
Confirmation of minutes. We have a recommendation there before us. Councillor Smurden to move. Someone to second. Councillor Stewart. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you.
Yes.
We have no petitions before us. Our first item is item 6.1, the corporate plan update for 22 to 27. I'll hand over to Mr. Lewis and Ms. Hatch.
Good morning, councillors. I'll hand over to Ms Hatch to present the update of the report. This basically is just relatively minor changes to the as been workshopped with council.
Yeah, the corporate plan, good morning Mr Mayor and councillors, the corporate plan was adopted 12 months ago and on the minute it said that we would review the plan for the incoming CEO's appointment. So we have done that. We've gone around and asked for some more feedback and the decision was to change the message of the CEO so that we had Mr Jennings in there, and also the numbering of the strategic pathways for ease of reference. Now the numbering will change from what's currently in there, or it's supposed to change because it's a bit confusing, to be A, B, C, D after, look where it is. The strategic pathways would be A, B, C, D instead of numbers. So that can be very clear between strategic priorities and strategic pathways. Is there any questions about any of the amendments?
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Milne?
I'd just like to say that in the 28th of June ordinary meeting, we had a report from LG Services, which was from Scott Mason, and item number 2 was a recommendation to consider making safety a value. We did basically note and adopt that report and where it was up to, and actually did have in there that we were making safety part of one of our values, which was accountability. I'm a little bit disappointed that we haven't gone through, because that was in the draft, and we haven't gone through with that, because safety has been identified as something being important for physical, emotional, mental health and cyber and digital safety. So I would like to move an amendment to the recommendation there to have safety added to the values of accountability, and the wording to be including the importance of safety after our actions. It's just a general message of safety. I think we need to have safety in there. It has been recommended by an external look at our organisation, and it doesn't nail down any type of safety in itself. No, it's in our values. So when looking at value, the first value of accountability, and I'd like to add the wording after the sentence, including the importance of safety.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thanks Councillor Milne. We did discuss it at the workshop and in teamwork and collaboration down the bottom, we said we will care for ourselves and others, and that was discussed, but that did come up at the workshop as well.
Any other questions, councillors? No. So are you moving
Yeah, in consideration that we'd, as a council, agreed to be moving forward in that meeting, I believe it is important to have the safety in there. So I am moving that amendment to include the words, including the importance of safety. I know we workshopped some other wording.
Can you just phrase the amendment so the staff can...
Yeah, including the wording, to add the wording in the accountability value.
And safety for others, wasn't it? So
Not including the importance of safety.
So can you just please read out
Yep.
exactly what you want in that sentence as it's worded? We are open, transparent, and take responsibility for our actions,
Including the importance of safety. So I know there was concerns about some of the other wording, but it's all encompassing.
It's on page 8 of the book.
I can't bring up my computer.
Just read that wording back also.
Yeah. For accountability, it says we are open, transparent, and take responsibility for our actions, comma, including the importance of safety.
Does that reflect the statement there?
Yeah, it's just including the importance of safety after the value as written.
Are you happy with that?
Yeah, that's just the 5 words. It's got safety in there as recommended.
Any questions, councillors? We have an amended recommendation there. Councillor Smith?
Mr Mayor, if you go down to strategic priorities, it does say in 3.3, council has safe, efficient and effective systems and processes to service the community needs. I think that might cover it, don't you?
Which one's that? Thank you.
A response.
I think the question,
Page 11.
the question was directed to me, Councillor Mill. Look, I thought we discussed this at length during the process and agreed on what we had, but there is a recommendation there, councillors, for consideration. So, is there any other questions? Councillor Mill?
Well, I'd just like to, I hope to frame the question, but I question, Councillor Smurden, it's the recommendation from LG Services was to make it a value, not one of our priorities or a pathway within council, which is an action out of it. It's actually making it one of our core values. So do you believe that having it written in a priority or a pathway is actually making it a value of council?
I think the statement covers it, yeah.
Councillor Devereux?
I just wonder, including the importance of safety, but do we add financial accountability? Do we add, do you know what I mean? There's a whole lot of things. I do remember talking about it, and it was agreed that there was nothing that we do that isn't, safety isn't part of, really, but it's one of the core things. I mean, I don't mind having it in there necessarily, but I just think if we put that in, are there then other things that we need to put in?
Do you respond?
Yes, please.
It was a recommendation that was out of an independent, and it was actually about having the actual wording, safety, in there. in that meeting in the 28th of June, it was stated that we were making safety a part of that, our values, and it did, it covers generally, physical, emotional, all the parts to do with safety in itself. Out of that meeting, because we were actually hitting an action item from that report, if we do not put it into our corporate plan now, then we will have to go back to that action item, that report, for another update, and then we actually have not done that part of that report, which is actually recommendation 2, which I thought was pretty high in his report to come back. So basically, we said we were looking at it and doing it, and said, yep, and now we're coming to here going, nah, we don't need to put the word in there, so then when we get that report back to us, we'll go, well, no, we didn't hit that and make it a part of our values. I know it's assumed, but I think that's what Mr Mason was coming out with, was instead of assumed safety, it's written in there, it is a value, it's something that we all as a council will be taking on board.
It's legislative, so.
And I think too, when we discussed this, we talked about care encompassing safety, and care being a more personal and emotional word relating to our staff's consideration for everyone else around them, not only our fellow staff, but also members of the community. And the care factor actually makes it an individual responsibility. Often the word safety applies to workplace health and safety, and it's the safety officer's responsibility to make sure that we're trained, and it's always someone else's responsibility. But when we have it as one of our values that we are to care for each other, that's actually personal. It puts the weight on the individual, not on the organisation. And whilst I agree with the information that you presented, Councillor, I actually like what we've come up with, in that it makes it an individual responsibility right across the organisation to care for one another within the organisation and to care for our community as well. And I think it's that personal touch that adds just a little bit more weight than simply looking to have a word in there for the sake of an external recommendation. So, are there any other questions, councillors? We have a recommendation there before us, an amended recommendation. Councillor Milne has moved. Is there someone to second? Councillor Devro to second. Councillor Milne to speak.
I'll go back to what I was outlining before. It was a recommendation from someone looking at our organisation from an external viewpoint, and to actually make it part of our values in our corporate plan. We have looked at this matter on the 28th of June ordinary meeting when we're having a report on that recommendation, and it was reported then that we were looking at it and it was part of the draft. I am very disappointed that it didn't actually make to this new reviewed corporate plan. I did believe that it was an important aspect to have in our organisation, because safety and care are not the same thing. I do believe, yes, care is something that we do value, and it is a good value to have in our organisation, but safety in itself is a responsibility, and it's an individual, everyone's responsibility, and that's why I'm moving this amendment, because it is something that has been recommended. It's something that we have partially agreed to looking at a prior meeting, and I believe it really should take part of this corporate plan.
Councillor Devra.
Thank you. I wish I had had just a little bit more notice so that I could go back and look at the things you're talking about. I do recall something about it. I will say, while I don't necessarily think it is lacking with what you say, we've got the care and thing, but I see no problem with adding the word safety to our values. I don't think it's a negative addition. Thank you.
2 speakers for the recommendation. Any speakers against? Councillor Smurden.
As I previously stated, I think it's covered in 3.3. Council has a safe, efficient and effective systems and processes to service the community needs. Just because it's been recommended by an outside consultant doesn't mean we have to go down that track. We've discussed it previously, and I think staff have drawn a corporate plan that agreed with what we decided in the last workshop, so I'm happy with the way it is.
Any other speakers for or against? I'm happy to speak against the amended recommendation. Safety and care as you pointed out, Councillor Milne, are two different things. You care for a spouse, you care for a family member, you can comply with safety regulation and really not care for people in the same way that you would care for them if they were part of a family. And I think care has a deeper connection and a deeper responsibility than just meeting safety regulations. So I think the original document has a level above and beyond the word of safety, and I would encourage all of our staff to care for one another, treat each other as if you are a family member, treat our community as if we're all part of a family, rather than just go out there and make sure we've ticked the boxes and that everyone is safe, because care is that next level. Any other speakers for or against? Councillor Milne to close.
Just reiterating on your words, Mr Mayor, care and safety are two different things. Therefore, the inclusion of safety into the corporate plan does give another level to the meaning of care. We can care for someone, but we don't necessarily have to act safely. So that's why I've moved this. I'd also like to remind that it's just one word, an amendment to the corporate plan. The corporate plan has obviously proved its test of time after being there for 12 months. I did have the amendment to have, this review, and I'm glad that this is the only thing that we could have come out of the corporate plan to improve on it. So we've done a good job to start with. Safety did come up in the original corporate plan formation. It's just parameters are put around on how many you can put in there, but there is no harm in having safety in here. So I don't believe that you should be, or councillors should necessarily be voting against something that does no harm to a document and it does something to enhance a document. The document itself is a good document. Any vote against it shouldn't be against the wording safety, it should be against the document itself. So from the addition of safety, it shouldn't really affect the document as full. As Councillor Devereux has pointed out, there is no harm in it. As you've pointed out yourself, there is a difference between care and safety. I do understand that Councillor Smerdon did identify it as one of the priorities, but it actually isn't a core value. So I'd like to see that addition as a core value, and I encourage everyone to support this amendment because it does heighten our organisation and it does ensure that we are all on the same page when it comes to safety. Thank you.
With that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation? Councillor Stewart, Councillor Milne, Councillor Devereux. Against? Councillor Waldock, Councillor Smerdon, Councillor Hartwig, Councillor Jensen. The motion is unsuccessful. We go back to the original recommendation. There's someone to move. Councillor Devereux, Councillor Smerdon second, Councillor Devereux to speak.
I don't think there's much to say. I agree with the amendments that were made as far as the numbering, lettering in there. It does make it easier. And it's good to see our CEO putting in a message. It was good to read. It's encouraging. Thank you.
Councillor Smerdon.
We all need a corporate plan. I think the one we've got is quite sufficient. Happy to second.
Two speakers for the recommendation. Any speakers against? Any other speakers for? So you're for the recommendation, Councillor Milne, or against?
For.
Okay. Councillor Milne.
This review of the corporate plan has come back with what I was hoping, which was actually no major amendments to our key response areas, our priorities and pathways. It shows that we were hitting what we needed to do as a community and a council for the next 5 years, and that a lot of all of our stuff that we've done so far can be plugged into the corporate plan, which is the most important document that we do have in council. It's legislated. If it's not in the corporate plan, we can't do it. So I'm very proud that we've actually been able to do that from last year. And it was really good to see the new CEO's message in there, and I'm very happy that you took my suggestion of numbering so we can actually refer to it a lot better, so we can actually start referring back to our pathways and priorities. Yeah, thank you.
Any other speakers for or against? Councillor Stewart.
Mr Mayor, I'm for, but I'm probably perhaps not as enthusiastic as some others are, because I said in the past, and I'll say again, I think it is missing a important area, which is a pipeline or a rough prioritisation of major projects into the future. And I know that's something which I believe we'll talk about sometime this year, hopefully, about whether it's sports fields, library, or whatever other major projects we may want to do. We need to give staff some sort of direction. I think corporate plan's the right place to do it, of mapping that out for the next 10 years, just roughly. And I think that's a missing part of the corporate plan, but we haven't done that work yet, so I'm not going to delay the corporate plan for that reason.
Any other speakers for or against? Councillor Debbo to close.
Nothing more to add, thank you.
With that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 6.2, procurement panel report. Mr. Lewis and Ms. Hatherall again.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and hand over to Ms. Hatherall and Mr. Harrop to present this report. Basically, this report presents the outcomes of the procurement panel for the month, with more items not requiring council resolution presented to a council workshop. The main item to be discussed today is the purchase of a landfill compactor for Council Point Road facility, and the acquisition of 8,000 hours of servicing for that plant item.
Just so everyone's aware, Mr. Harrop and his lovely wife have recently become Australian citizens, so I had the pleasure of officiating that ceremony, so congratulations.
You're welcome.
You're right. Mr. Mayor and councillors, the report that you have before you is for the supply, delivery and servicing of a compactor for our Bonnick Road waste management facility. The process that we're coming back to you for is to endorse the recommendation for an alternative machine. After some extensive conversations and assessments during our initial process, the time frame and the condition of the current compactor meant that we had to go back to market. We need a compactor in a shorter period of time that was guaranteed by the previously recommended supplier. The machine has been through an extensive assessment process by the panel, and they believe that this machine that is recommended as part of this report will fulfil the obligations of compacting and meet the standards that are required for the Bonnick Road facility.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Stewart?
So I've got a question around the price score. The price score doesn't seem to match the tendered amounts. I presume the price score is a relative thing, and it doesn't match the tendered amounts in terms of going from smallest to largest or whatever.
In the table?
In the table. So like for the GCM Enviro, the H380, you got price score 4.0. Then you got two that are more expensive that are 4.02, and the most expensive is under 4, and it doesn't make sense.
We may have to take that on notice. The panel members are not here. Can you give us a moment?
Yep.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so the question is, the dearest priced or the dearest tenders have a lower ranking in relation to price?
Well, you'd think that, I'm not sure how it's supposed to go, but the price scores should reflect the tendered amounts, and doesn't seem to.
Yeah, so the price score should have a lower lower score in relation to price as the price goes up.
So yeah, so the lowest priced one should have the highest score, and then as the price goes up, the score should go lower.
That's right. So
and it doesn't seem to be that way.
If you look at the last one, the Tanner H450, it has a price score of 383.87, as opposed to the cheapest priced machine, which has a price score of 4.00.
The O2. It doesn't affect the overall score.
Just while they're getting that detail, Mr. Lewis, the tendered amount for the CAT compactor, how much was that?
That was?
$100 mil. Was that $100 mil, wasn't it?
What has been doing?
Is it 1.2 or something like that?
It was around that price.
Yeah.
I guess the issue with the Caterpillar machine, and it was our previously favoured option, the issue with that machine is basically timing. And
I guess
time is of the essence for this product because
the question I have is the 45-tonne machine, would that give better results at landfill in terms of compaction, therefore saving airspace? And I know it's a more expensive machine, but it fitted in with the budgeted amount for the CAT machine. And was there did the panel give any consideration to whether that machine A would perform any better and B would save us money in terms of better utilisation of airspace?
My understanding was that the larger machine would have additional ability to compact further, so there would be some additional airspace savings in the future. The panel's not here, so I can't.
The current Caterpillar in a new state would give 1.98 kN compaction. The machine that's before you for recommendation giving 186 kN. The 450 goes above and beyond, and that's at 221 kN. One of the main driving forces was in the decision and the recommendation before you was the delivery of the machine. The original price was 1.1 million, give or take. I haven't got the exact figure for the Hastings Deering machine.
Yeah.
Was originally due to be delivered in Jan 24. That was pushed out to March 2025 with no guarantee of that. So the decision was made to obviously look at the market and what we could get. When you're talking about the machines, Mr. Mayor, you're talking about the ones that are in the report.
The H450 there or the Eco.
So the H450 there is delivery in 8 to 10 months, whereas we've got confirmation that the H380 can be delivered in January this year. Next year, 2024. Apologies.
so I guess in summary the heavier machine gives us greater compaction rates, but the delivery is pushed out and council officers are concerned about the ongoing viability of using the existing machines.
Yeah, my concern though is landfill is something we will be doing for a very long time, and whilst waiting 10 months for a delivery of a heavy machine, if our machine reaches end of life and breaks down, we may have to hire something, and that will be an expense. But if you look at the saving in airspace from extra compaction over 10 or 20 years, are we better off with a heavier machine? And because we'll save it in the long run in terms of that airspace utilisation.
My understanding there is that it's very difficult to acquire machinery under lease or hire for landfill operations.
I've seen one sitting out at Long Flat for about 6 months or more, probably 10 months.
So officers are happy to go with the alternative recommendation of the heavier machine. There is increased risk with that decision.
See, Ms. Stengle's here.
Yeah.
Councillor Ward. Councillor Wardock, then Councillor Deborah.
Through the chair, thank you. I get it, yeah, we're facing risk here and that probably outweighs performance. As the panel considered, where we sit in performance over the life of the airspace, taking into consideration where the new area is going and whether that's going to impact it, and if not, well, the direction you're going makes sense. I mean, we're not trying to get maximum performance because we've got the space there all the time to consider. Is that something that's been considered?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe the panel considered a number of things, including the airspace and the compaction rate and the condition of the current compactor. And there are a number of reports being done on a very regular basis for the current compactor. So I think they took all of those factors into consideration.
Thank you.
Councillor Devereux?
Just through the Mayor, it would make more sense to have Alex talking about this for the answers, I guess. But I was wondering, well, first of all, I've looked up that October 2022 and the amount was 1,073,000. So it wasn't the...
Is that plus GST or excluding?
Exclusion of GST, yeah, but GST for us is, for a council, is different, I thought, so. Okay, so what is ECO? Because we've got one options here with ECO written after them, so what same machine, but it's got that. What's the difference?
Slightly more economical engine within it. So the overall running cost is slightly lower.
Wouldn't that be a good thing?
When we did the analysis on the price difference, it was not of significance.
You paid upfront for the technician.
Yeah. For a long-term benefit, I would have thought, but okay. That's all I've got, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Smith?
What was the weight of the cat?
The cat compaction rate is 1.98 when new.
Yeah, but what was the weight of it? Was it a...
Weight, sorry, don't have the weight, we have the compaction rate.
So...
Because it does, the weight's not necessarily gives you the overall compaction, it's to do with the machine, how it operates, the size of the actual wheel, the rollers, and the articulation of it.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it might also be worth noting that council officers are concerned that the current machine we have will not last the 10-month period or delay.
Councillor Mill?
If our current machine doesn't last the 10-month delay, if we go with another recommendation, what's the risk to council and what's the outcome of that non-having a compactor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there would be a risk of short-term not having a compactor. We could hire a machine, but the cost of hiring that machine, the indications or figures we have would be significant, between $30,000 and $50,000 a month. If we can get the machine and we can get it.
Through the Mayor, just confirming, I think that it comes down to the inability to lease a machine, and not having the panel here. What's the level of research that's been done on that, Mr. Lewis? Or Ms. Harry?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as a result of our councillors' inquiries previously on this, we did investigate the opportunity to lease, to hire and the like these machines. We couldn't get a direct lease, we could only get a lease to buy, and the cost was significant. As I just answered in my previous comment, around 30 to 50 a month, but it was at the higher end when we did do the arbitrary pricing. We asked some people, we didn't get them to provide us physical quotes, but that was what they indicated.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Did we look at other options? Like the machine that I've seen sitting at Long Flat for a long time, it may not have the waste compactor, it's got soil compacted wheels on it, which may be a stopgap measure. And those sort of machines, there's no way you'd have to lease to buy. I mean, they lease those sort of machines around the country all the time. I'm just, a 5% better compaction rate over 10 years on our landfill actually adds up to a lot of airspace that we can use and a lot of savings for ratepayers. And I'm not sure that I've got enough information to support the recommendation at the moment. Councillor Mill?
Mr. Mayor, with the lighter, it's only got a compaction rate. Is that through how many passes it does? Can it get greater compaction, more passes it
No, it's really just a weight.
It's just a weight issue. I appreciate
Weight.
it.
Councillor Stewart.
How reliable are these timelines in getting machines? Because, well, one company's already said that they've delayed.
Yeah.
So is that going to be a possibility with this company as well, or is it firm, or?
For you, Mr Mayor, yeah, we confirmed, we went direct source, utilising the exception of local buying. So we have made contact to ask for their delivery of this particular machine that's recommended. And they have confirmed it can be January 2024.
And through Mr Mayor, the secondary machine or the heavy machine is October 2024.
8 to 10 months from place of order.
Through you, Mr Mayor, but previously we just had a chat with Ms Stengel, who is a portfolio manager for this area, as I'm the director. Ms Stengel wasn't on the evaluation panel, her team was involved in that, and Paul, who was doing that, is now left council. So we've got the records, we've got the notes, we've got the information that James has, but there are a couple of questions that you've asked today that which we just needed to check. In terms of the compaction rate, the heavier machine is significant, is better, and the smaller machine is adequate for the volumes that we have and the lifespan of the cell prior to securing the new cell construction. Yes, we would get better life out of the larger machine. Some of the issues are articulated rollers as opposed to single rollers and the ability of those machines to compact more effectively. The ones we're looking at are articulated rollers, which are more difficult to drive, but ultimately long-term better, but they have a slightly less impact on the articulation, which is why the heavier machine, on the compaction, which is why the heavier machine is better. In terms of managing the 8 to 10 months, officers are reluctant to say we could definitely do it. We haven't investigated the machine that you're talking about at Long Flat because we believe it's linked into another business and we're not sure that they would lease it to us. We haven't investigated that particular machine, even though we have investigated other opportunities. I don't know if that helps. If it was appropriate and councillors felt they were inclined to do so, we could delay this and investigate that option. We could investigate that option prior to placing an order based on the machine, but we don't think that will necessarily change significantly. Through you, Mr Mayor, it is also appropriate that if we do delay, we may lose the machine that is available for delivery in January. So.
I'm wondering whether we, because there's quite a few questions that I don't have answered, and my instinct tells me that the heavier machine will deliver far better long-term outcomes. Whether we have a recommendation that is open to allow the organisation to go and do the evaluation we've asked for, and then report back to the CEO for a decision. If it's deemed that the 38 tonner is the way to go, then I'd be happy to see that happen. But if it was deemed that the 45 tonne with the risk associated was a more appropriate outcome, that the CEO could then place that order. I don't want to see it delayed another month or so, simply because it needs to be reported to a council meeting. Councillor Milne.
Mr Mayor, the reluctance in leasing a machine for a waste facility, from my experience of watching them, it's just the potential damage to the machine and the impact to the machine, doesn't matter what machine it is probably where the reluctance to hire for waste compaction comes from. So that's what's so difficult.
It's a wear and tear on the machine.
Okay.
Councillor Devereux.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, I share your concerns. However, the eco was 1.72% more initially, but we're not going to worry about that. But this is, nearly 2 $200,000 more, which is a lot bigger. But my main thing is, although I do share your concerns with it, I think we have to trust that the panel has done the research and that they've made what they think is the best decision. I am a little disappointed that we didn't have some of the answers that we wanted. But by the same token, in the end, it's more important to me that we do the right thing by by our waste out there, by Bonnick. We've got issues and we have to manage it as reasonably and responsibly as we can. And I think cracking on, getting this bit of machinery, which we originally ordered back in 2022, I just think any further delay is a risk. So I'd like to see it go through for that reason. Thank you.
Any other councillors? I'm happy to move an amendment that the organisation conduct assessment of the questions that councillors had in relation to the heavier vehicle and report back to the CEO for purchase of the implement or vehicle or machinery most suitable to council's needs.
Would we be looking at a special meeting then to
No.
make it quicker, or it would be another month?
No, we would be delegating the CEO authority to either purchase the 38 tonner if that's the best, given all the circumstances, or the 45.
Okay.
So we probably need to include, delegate that authority to the CEO actually into the recommendation.
We're not finished yet. Can you just, excuse me, Ms. Hathaway, can you do this?
No, can someone just scroll up and
There we go, happy days.
Heads up.
The CEO and implement the recommendations to purchase the most appropriate machine given council circumstances.
Through the schedule, we add an associated servicing costs.
Yes, and associated servicing costs.
Purchase the most appropriate machine. Yeah.
Yes.
Including.
And associated servicing costs.
Including associated servicing costs.
If we can just go back to the start, that council delegates to the CEO and then at the end that the investigation outcomes are reported to all councillors.
Could you just, through Mr. Mayor, could you just say that council delegates to the CEO to conduct further investigation?
Yeah.
Into the questions raised. That's right. Into the questions raised.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. You got it. So the council delegates to the CEO.
And we'll maybe I don't report back to myself, we'll report back to council.
Sorry.
Well, we were asking that the organisation do the investigation and report back to you.
Yes.
Okay.
However,
The organisation does.
Yeah. You're right. You're right.
Well,
That council delegates to the CEO.
Yep.
To conduct.
Into the questions raised. So it's the organisation doing the work, not the CEO, and that they report back to the CEO and implement the recommendation to purchase the most appropriate machine, including associated servicing costs, that the investigation outcomes are reported to all councillors.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, it should be just to the CEO to investigations and directs the organisation.
Righto.
So to me, it should be the council delegates to the CEO to conduct investigations into the questions raised by councillors. And
So remove that the organisation.
Yeah, top right.
To
And then remove report back to CEO.
and implement. Correct. That's right.
We don't want a conversation with yourself.
Try not to speak to myself.
It's the only way I get any sense.
Never get a disagreement.
I do. Own worst critic.
What's that?
I think we're in the right place.
You happy with that, Mr Mayor?
I'm happy with that. So I'm happy to move that recommendation. Someone to second. That amendment, Councillor Smerd. I think we've spoken enough on this topic. I think there's some questions that need to be answered, and I would like the organisation to contemplate long-term value. I understand there's risk associated with any piece of machinery. I mean, it could break down tomorrow. That's a cold, hard reality, and we could have to go into the market and find something. It could also last 12 months rather than 10, and that consideration around the long-term benefits of saved airspace, I think, is something that's absolutely pertinent for our council and our waste team, given the hard work they've done to secure the eastern cell and the limited time frame that that cell gives us to actually then get another large-scale facility in place. I'm very happy to.
It's deleted.
I'm so sorry. Will we move to this deletion?
Can we undo that?
We cannot.
Control Z, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, well, while we're bringing it back, I'll ask Councillor Smerd to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree with you, but time is of the essence. So the quicker these investigations are done, the better. Because if we do go with the smaller machine, we may miss that window. But we do have restrictions on airspace, so the better machine would be the heavier one. So even though I was told the weight had nothing to do with it, but anyway, I'm happy to second.
Mr Burns, if you give the team a hand with remembering a recommendation, you've got the best memory here, I think.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure it out.
We've had two speakers for the recommendation. Are there any speakers against? Councillor Devereux.
Yeah, I kind of feel that it's already been done. We've got a panel in place to look at these things. They've come back and said it's the second lowest scoring and the lowest scoring. It's a full, on price it was pretty much, spot on with the other one, but when it comes to non-price score, it's a full half a point behind. So I just feel like it's already been done.
Any other speakers for or against? Councillor Waldock.
A statement. I know boats, but I don't know compactors. I don't really know too much about $1 million compactors, but the organisation's professional opinion does. We're looking at a H380 here that does the job fine at whatever the cost is. There's a H450, which is a little bit more, 200,000 around about, give or take, for the risk of a fair bit. But if we put in another, which is called a tenner, H520, it's even better up. How far do you go? But it all comes down to the costs and value for money and get the job done efficiently and in a timely manner. I think that the facts put in front of us, and we just need to have our faith in our organisation's professional opinion.
Any other speakers for or against? Councillor Mill.
Against. I believe I agree with Councillor Waldock there that we do need to put faith in our procurement systems. I've said it before. I believe that they have done the research into it. I know there has been questions raised on different machines, but it is a machine fit for purpose. We do have a risk to our landfill, not having a compactor with an ability not to be able to possibly lease. I believe that all the work has been done and all the questions have been answered in this procurement. Is a heavy machine got other risks associated with it? Are they more expensive to get bits for? I don't know. That's their department. I've just seen what the machines can do, and I wouldn't lease in either. But I don't have machines, so I'm happy with what we were originally recommended it with, and I believe that we're just giving the organisation extra work that they don't need, and plus, for a more expensive machine, you could put more money into resource recovery options, which is going to outweigh compaction any day if you don't have the waste in the landfill. So I'm not willing to delay. I'd rather get it done today.
Any other speakers for or against? No, close. I think the interesting point Mr. Harrop made is that the machine that we're suggesting we purchase at a 38 tonne has a lower compaction rate than our current machine. So we are already going to lose airspace if we purchase this machine. And that airspace is money. So you might save $200,000 up front, but based on our current compaction rates, you will not get as much airspace as we actually will if we had the same machine. If we go to a heavier machine, we may actually get more airspace. And whilst we may believe that these questions have been answered, the information hasn't been able to be presented to us in any detail, in any way, to ensure councillors that that they have been questioned, they have been answered. I think part of the non-price score would have been very much swayed by availability. And yes, that is a serious issue. But as I pointed out, they're a machine. They could break down tomorrow and we would have to scramble to find a machine to replace that. And it may go on for 12 months. They're interesting, these machines, like old cars, they sometimes just keep going forever. We have voted in the past on a jet patcher, and we voted on a belief and feelings that we had all the information, and it turned out we didn't. And to me, waste is one of our high-risk areas, because as a council last term we were taken down a path that was going to cost the ratepayers a fortune. The waste team have done an exceptional job to get us back to the point now where our short-term needs are covered with the Eastern Cell, and they got that work done in a record period of time. But if we go with a lighter machine with a lower compaction rate, some of that work is going to be undone, because what we thought maybe 5 years life may only turn out to be 4 or 4.5. So I would rather see an evaluation done to absolutely ascertain whether or not the H450 is the better machine, and with the higher compaction, does that extend the Eastern Cell from 5 years to 6 years, and buy the organisation and the ratepayers a greater period of time to establish a suitable long-term waste facility that this machine then can go on and service and actually extend the life of it through greater compaction as well. So I'd encourage councillors to allow the CEO in a short space of time, we're not talking months, we're talking a short space of time, to have the questions that have been raised answered, and purchase the machine based on all the circumstances, the risk and everything associated with it, which is in the best interest of our region, but also that supports the staff and the work that they've done to get us to this point, because it wasn't that long ago that if we continued down the path that we inherited in 2020, ratepayers would have their waste bill probably going up by 2 or 3 times what it is now, simply to cover the cost of transportation to another facility. And the team should be supported in the work that they've done to get us here with the Eastern Cell and extend the life of that as long as possible. And that's why I'd encourage councillors to support the recommendation and allow the appropriate investigation to be done and ensure the questions are answered and the CEO make the decision that's in the interest of the organisation. With that, we'll go to vote. All those in favour of the amended recommendation? Councillor Waldock, Councillor Smerdon, Councillor Hartwig, Councillor Jensen. Against? Councillor Stewart, Councillor Devro, Councillor Milne. The recommendation is carried. Thank you. With that, was there anything else for the procurement panel? No? Wonderful, thank you. We have our finance report from Mr Lewis, third time lucky.
Mr Mayor, I'll hand over to Ms Hatherall to present the findings of the report, but as at the end of the month, there are no major risks evident in our finances to this point, but there are some significant variances within some of our line items.
Any questions? Is there anything you wish to add, Mr Hatherall? Any questions, councillors? We have a recommendation there before us. Is there someone to move? Councillor Stewart, someone to second. Councillor Waldock, Councillor Stewart, speak.
Mr Mayor, I do note our increased rate income is to do with a lot more rateable properties, which is obviously a reflection of the building boom, it seems lately, and more interest rates, which is nice if you got money invested rather than borrowing money. I also note that the rail infrastructure has been taken off our equity, so that would also help with depreciation, but depreciation's gone up for other reasons, so it causes more costs. But generally speaking, from what I can see, things are running pretty as we were wanting. So I also note that, sorry, one more thing was that I did look at the funds. It looks like we've got lots of funds, but a lot of those funds, $67 million is constrained because it's grant funding, which we've got to spend on certain things. It's infrastructure charges, which we've got to spend on certain things. Provision for things like landfill and quarry sites. So while we have a healthy bank balance, a lot of that money is set aside for particular purposes. So I'm happy to move.
Councillor Waldock.
Risk. Word of the day. And in this agenda there is none, so yeah, happy to second.
Two speakers for the recommendation, any speakers against? Any other speakers for? Councillor Stewart to close.
Nothing further to add, thanks.
With that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried, thank you. Item 6.4, budget amendment for 22-23. Carry forward. And over to Mr Lewis and Ms Hatherall.
Mr Mayor and Councillors, the report before you is our draft proposed amendment to our capital program. Under the local government regulation, councils can amend their budgets during the financial year. And as part of the end of financial year process, we close off a lot of our capital program, some of which has not quite been completed and the budget has not been fully expended. Those projects have to continue into the following financial year, and this report recognises the projects that are being moved into the budget that's being moved into this year. We will be presenting another budget review at the October meeting, and that focuses more on how we're tracking with the current financial year, and there'll be an amendment in relation to some of the phasing of those capital program jobs to try and compensate for this additional funds coming in from last financial year. If there's any questions at all?
Questions, councillors? We have recommendations there before us. Is there someone to move? Councillor Stewart, someone to second. Councillor Milne. Councillor Stewart, speak.
Mr Mayor, as we are aware, capital projects don't neatly fit into financial years, particularly big ones like Easter Creek Road widening and Sandy Creek Road widening and things like that. So they just will naturally go over the financial year. Some of the projects I think are probably completed now, like the Lake Alfred water quality. I see they've done more work on that. And no doubt in this financial year there'll be projects that will be carried forward because they're not complete. So, but it's good actually to see it's probably down than on previous years. So that shows that we're doing the capital works we need to do, so I'm happy to move.
Councillor Milne?
I agree with Councillor Stewart. Capital projects don't fit neatly within 1 year, so there was always going to be carry forward projects. I'm not quite sure where we're going to find the few $1 million of projects to push out to accommodate this. However, it is just part of budgeting and just what we have to do as an organisation. It's that balance that we need to do. But I am happy that we're going forward with our capital projects and we're getting on a good target. So hopefully we can complete this year and not have too many follow on for the next year. So yeah, happy to second this motion.
2 speakers for the recommendation, any speakers against, any other speakers for? Councillor Stewart to close.
Nothing further to add, thanks.
With that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Otherall. Mr. Lewis, we'll move on to section 7.1, Community Sustainability Directorate Update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors. As you will be aware, this is our quarterly update. It is, again, an extensive report that just demonstrates the range of activities that council successfully produces and undertakes, and also provides some interesting statistics for our region and our operations. I will take the report as read, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Any questions, councillors? Pretty comprehensive. Councillor Devereux.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, page 24, it's just got grant writing workshops. I just want to ask a question there, and I guess it'll be one for Robert. Through grants, there's the opportunity to have literally millions added to our community's efforts. And I'm just wondering, is there any consideration to, on top of the workshops, to having a staff member whose job it is to actually work and write the grants with community groups? Because they are daunting for, what we generally got with the community groups are not people who are professional grant writers, but people who are mums and dads, tradies, school teachers, whatever. Not everyone has the ability to look at these forms and follow them through. So I have asked this once before, but is there consideration being given to having that upped, I guess, the ante there? Or perhaps another way around it would be grants to allow, that the groups can use to go to a professional grant writer. I don't know. So that's my question.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Deverell's question suggested that it may be appropriate for the CEO to answer, so I was just waiting to see whether Robert wanted to answer. But if you're okay,
just very quickly,
CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I thought you had it, but look, we do have grant writing workshops, and we do have a grants officer, but I'll get Mr. Burns to talk.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have, as the CEO referenced, an officer who is dedicated to supporting community groups writing grants. It is quite complicated should we write the grants for them. We really can't do that. They need to be able to write their own grants because we accept it to be a liability if we are writing the grants for them. But we can do grant writing workshops, and we have an officer who works with community groups to assist them writing grants. That's dedicated. There is definitely a conflict of interest if those grants were for council-provided grants.
Yeah, I'm
this
thinking
would be
external funds, yeah.
So I presume you're only talking about that, and that's really it. We have an officer, there's no further consideration given, as council has raised regularly. Resourcing is an issue, and the number of staff that we have is an issue in terms of a budgetary situation, so we are trying to manage the number of staff in various roles and functions, and we've never done a cost-benefit analysis on that, but it's a very intangible subject.
I've just got a clarification question, Mr. Burns. In the building certification and those other commercial spaces where council operates, but there's also a public industry as well around that, we have to charge a fee that is equivalent to the cost of what it would, what a normal member of the community, a certified individual would do. Now, there is a grant writing industry there. If we were to put on a staff member to step into this space, would we be bound by legislation to also charge a fee just like we are with building certification?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, 100%. The Competitions Act and something called competitive neutrality does come into play. We were recently just in this section audited on some of that, in my directorate audited on some of that competitive neutrality. It is something that we do need to model our fees and charges and pricing based around that. Because there is a grant writing industry, we could do it for free, but the argument would be, are we taking away, is there a niche market? There is some opportunity within that legislation for council to fill gaps created in that niche market if there is a clear and defined community gap. But if we were charging a small fee, we would definitely have to be comparable to those grant writing companies.
And if we did it for free, would we be leaving ourselves open for, let's say, a grant writer who runs a grant writing business to come and go, hey, council's taking, taking work away from me? Just like if we were doing building certification for free, we could end up being exposed.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the two things are probably a little different in terms of business model, but I'm sure a grant writing company may not see it that way. There is a philosophical position that we are, by supporting grant writing in that way, adding value to the community, and that's how that social responsibility is how we would get around, I don't like that phrase, but how we would be able to do it under the existing legislation if we chose to go that path. But yeah, there would definitely be some organisations, if they operated in this area, who would have justification to question what we were doing.
So there might be some options there though for us if we were to pursue it.
Particularly for groups that are under-resourced or significantly not-for-profit community benefit and added value in a market space that wasn't really covered elsewhere, yes, there is a possibility we could do that.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Devereux?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, you mentioned that we do currently offer some assistance. What do we do then?
I might have to take some of that on notice, councillors, and send you an email about the specifics.
Yep.
But in essence, we do. We have an advice service that that people can ring up and talk to an officer. I have shared that with a number of councillors in the past and provided that to a number of groups in the past. Wishlist was probably the most recent one where we put that particular group in touch with the grant writing officer to support them. We do workshops with communities. We do go and talk to community halls to support them with workshops and assistance in that space. But if councillors wished, I could probably provide a full list.
Thank you. It does help because we do talk as councillors to a lot of groups, so that'd be good. And just to give some idea of the value involved here, I do know that 8 Ball paid for, Olivia Everett is a grant writer. It was $1,000 and they got over $90,000 in a grant back, which means...
If we can just not mention grant writers by name, it could be seen as we're favouring a particular...
Oh, yeah, no, fair enough.
No, there's no intent on your part.
I'm just giving the details. Yeah, all right.
But there are people out there that would love
$1,000 to $90,000. So when you look at value for the community, it is substantial. Also, the reason I did mention that was a grant writer that the council actually had a talk with, like was talking to the group, so I didn't think there was a problem. Thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor Stewart?
Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the nice detail on the community grants. I think it's the first time I've seen in one place where all community grants have gone over the past year, and that we've actually spent all the money. Question around land for wildlife. Actually, it's also good to see the throughput of livestock through our sale yards. Good question about landfall wildlife, which the feedback I've had is that it's very popular. We have a lot of landholders wanting to take part, and I guess it's a bit like Councillor Devereux's question. It's a staffing issue, and whether we have the staff we need to assist our landholders. The feedback I get is that we have one staff member who is very part-time land for wildlife, and there may not be the capacity to assist the local landholders.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, unlike the grant, and similar to the grant in some ways, we have an officer as part of the environment team who is dedicated to be our land for wildlife officer. They spend a significant proportion of their operating time on the Land for Wildlife programme. Land for Wildlife within Gympie is, I dare say, one of the most successful Land for Wildlife programmes that I've seen. It is very successful. There are a lot of engaged and invested people in Land for Wildlife in this area. But I'm not aware of any direct feedback to the director and to the manager who is here that we are not servicing any interested parties who may wish to take part. The idea behind Land for Wildlife is that once we allow them to set it up, we do provide support and advice, but we don't kind of run the programme for them. There are some of the Land for Wildlife participants who want a bit more investment from our officer, and we aren't resourced to do that. Personally, I think we cater reasonably well in that space, but would be welcoming of any feedback if there are people who say they aren't getting support to undertake Land for Wildlife who currently don't do it.
Councillor Milne.
Mr. Mayor, you said significant time from the Land for Wildlife officer. Do we actually know how much of his time is allocated to Land for Wildlife? Because I don't believe we have an officer dedicated to Land for Wildlife. It would be lovely, luxury. But yeah, I'm happy to take it on notice, but what time is it per month or per week or is actually dedicated for Land for Wildlife program, and how many participants we may have for Land for Wildlife, and do we have, a waiting list or something like that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't think it's in the report. Don't have a specific number. I might take that on notice. I don't believe we would have that information to hand immediately in terms of the number of participants for Land for Wildlife. The officer engaged, it is a significant proportion of their time, probably, I'm just looking at the stable here, but probably in excess of 50%.
Possibly, through about 80% of his time, easily. And then the rest of the remaining time he spends on Commissioner's Gully, Wiki, and flying foxes and other operational needs such as looking at environmental works for council's projects.
Yeah, he works extensively with the Mary River Catchment Group too in terms of our relationship in that space and the Widgie regeneration for the flying foxes. But yeah, Alex would know more better than I, so if 80% is about it, but we don't log the hours to that programme. Ironically enough, our new system that we're looking to adopt will provide that information in the future.
Any other questions, councillors? We have a recommendation there before us. Is there someone to move? Councillor Stewart, someone to second? Councillor Devereux. Councillor Stewart to speak.
Mr. Mayor, as portfolio councillor for some of these areas, it's good to see progress being made. Very happy to see the Cat's Claw program, creeper program, heading to 6 Mile Creek, which is in the best part of the region. And it's good to see working with landholders in regards to trying to probably not eradicate, but to control the spread of Cat's Claw creeper. And also good to see that the compliance team has a full staff, and I know that they're very relieved and makes them more able to respond to customer complaints about 1,001 different things, from what neighbours do to litter to whatever else. So that's really good to see. So I'm happy to move that we receive this report.
Councillor Deborah.
I always enjoy reading through this report. So thank you very much for the detail that's in there. And I really don't have much more to add. It's an excellent report and I appreciate it. Thank you.
2 speakers for the recommendation, any speakers against, any other speakers for? Councillor Stewart, opposed.
Nothing further to add, thanks.
That will go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 7.2. We have Councillor Jensen. Can you just make your declaration, please? So they can note it on the minutes.
I have a declarable conflict of interest. I'm a member of the Thebine Hall, so I'll leave the meeting and let you guys make a decision.
You. Any other declarations, councillors, before we move on? Great. We'll item 7.2, grant funding recommendation, community halls insurance category. And over to you, Mr. Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As councillors will be aware, we have a number of grant funds that are rolling rounds. The insurance for community halls category is a rolling round. This is the first application that we have received. We do fund these grants until funding available is expended. And this one is for the Thebine Hall. I will take the report as read, but I am predicting that there may be questions about other halls. We haven't yet had those applications in, but we are expecting them and they will come to future council meetings. In terms of the recommendation, we're just seeking approval that we can approve this grant and provide this funding to the Thebine Memorial Recreational Centre.
Any questions, councillors? No, we have a recommendation there before us. Is there someone to move? Councillor Devro, someone to second? Councillor Spurgeon, Councillor Devro to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a little bit of information on this. The insurance is actually 15 grand that the hall's got to pay. So although 5 grand seems like a lot of money, it is only a third. They've got to fundraise for the remainder. I think we spoke about that when we were talking about the amounts for this sort of thing, but I'd bring it up because, like I say, it seems like an awful lot. Thank you.
Councillor Smeaton.
Insurance bills are getting higher and higher, and I have no objection to council helping private halls to meet some of those requirements.
2 speakers for the recommendation. Any speakers against? Other speakers for? I'm happy to support this recommendation. The Thebine Hall does a lot of work getting grants and other funding to maintain that hall, and for those who are looking for a bit of an easy, relaxing night out, the Thebine Hall meet and greets are a wonderful place to connect the community and probably catch up with some old friends. So happy to support this recommendation. Councillor Stewart, to close.
Nothing further to add, thanks.
With that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? My apologies. Councillor Devro to close.
Nothing further to add.
With that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Just get Councillor Jensen back. We will, when Councillor Jensen comes back in, we'll move on to item 7.3, Gympie Council Infrastructure Charges Resolution. I'll hand over to Mr. Burns and Mr. Kitchington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I will present the report. Mr. Kitchington is here to help me. I'm hoping there won't be very many questions. However, I do have an admission to make as well as part of presenting this report. The Council have previously adopted this report back in July, and as such we changed the infrastructure charge resolution, and there was significant debate, and we moved to the cap for the infrastructure charges. The infrastructure charge resolution allows us to charge those figures. However, as we are charging organisations a chunk of money to develop their infrastructure, there is always questions, and we have found a slight anomaly in terms of the wording, and it was ambiguous. So this is us clearing up that ambiguity and being clearer around the changes in the accommodation short term and an exposure that council could have had. In addition, the admission is that the attachment that was originally attached to the agenda, and we can't change the agenda once it's gone out, was in fact an earlier draft of the attachment. The correct version has been sent to the councillors. The real only change was not significant. It was that the draft in the agenda said 22, and 2022 significantly or majorly across the document, and it referenced August 1st at one point, and those are changed dates. It needed to move to 2023 and an October date. So we have provided that in an email to councillors, and we can amend the recommendation to reflect that if appropriate. The date was the 3rd of October, which is next Tuesday. I'll take the report as read other than that, and happy to answer any questions councillors may have.
Councillor Dever.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, just to get it in my head straight, the 10,000 or 11,000 for 2 or less campsites and 15 for 3 or more. So isn't it normally cheaper for more, like a bulk thing? Is it not? What am I not getting?
Through Mr Mayor. So the original intention was a group of 3 tents made a campsite, and that would attract a certain amount of contribution. In this case, I think it was $15,000. When you add that second phrase there, or more, it actually allowed you to have multiple of 3 but still pay $15,000. That wasn't the intention. So if you look at the revised table over the page, essentially it's $15,000 per group of 3 tent sites, rather than 3 or more.
And through you, Mr Mayor, in direct answer to the councillor's question, ordinarily you get a discount for more, except where the more creates a higher impost on council services and facilities. So more means you use more, so you should pay more, not get a discount. And that's what this refers to, because the previous version, you could have had 300 campsites.
And still pay
$15,000.
Yes, which is clearly wrong.
Which is clearly wrong. And it was the addition of that or more, and it was reviewed by 2 separate legal companies. So we've taken off that or more, and now you pay for the group of 3, which was the original intent of the term, and that was what we wanted it to say. It's just that typo created that ambiguity.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Stewart.
Mr Mayor, my question is related but not quite on topic, in that the comparison between Kiev and Gameri and the rest is quite a big difference, especially when compared to other differences. Is there some reason for that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, that was debated quite heavily when we brought this to council originally, and we felt that we wanted to support investment in development in the west, and as a result we retained the figures for the west, Kilpegan and Gameri, at the previous infrastructure charge resolution rates. And that was a council request. The original report that came to council didn't do that. Councillors requested we revise that condition as part of the workshop discussion. We went away, and that's how it came up in this process.
But for the other categories, it's like half to 3/4, whereas this one is like a quarter, and that just seems that's enormous discount, I think.
Through you, Mr Mayor, it is a large discount, but it's what councillors requested at the time.
Councillor Deborah.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, it's been a little while now since it's been in place. What is the response to the discount?
Through you, Mr Mayor.
Is it working?
Sorry?
Is it working?
Through you, Mr Mayor, as you would be aware, we brought the one report just to the last council about a development in Imble, where there were some questions. But in essence, we've had very, very, very little pushback at all. It does seem to be working, and we are recovering more infrastructure charges than previous. The land values that have increased in the Gympie region have probably helped that, because it is not seen as a significant impost. Of course, if you're doing a big development, some people are up for quite a lot of money, but we've been pleasantly surprised at the ease at which we've recovered this, and there have been some very large payments made to council in respect of this. So, yeah, I would say that on the face of it, it is working.
That, specifically Gameri and Kilkeven, the discount.
Probably a 10-year question, but through Mr Mayor, we don't get a lot of development out there, so it's a bit early to tell.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? We have a recommendation there before us. Is there someone to move? Councillor Devro, someone to second? I'll rush. Councillor Stewart. I'll get it right this time, Councillor Devro. Councillor Devro to speak.
There's not much really to say to this. It's always good to get the wording right, make sure it's nice and clear for everyone, so that whoever's doing the application knows where they stand, but also to save our staff from having to argue for something they shouldn't be arguing for or against. So, more than happy to support this.
Councillor Stewart.
And if we can avoid more legal fees for lawyers, that's good. So I'm happy to second.
Two speakers for the recommendation. Any speakers against? Any speakers for? Councillor Devro to close.
I don't think there's much more to be said. I do look forward to, down the track, finding out whether that discount in Kilkeven and Gameri is working. Because if it's not, there's no need to continue to have it there, I guess. But for now, more than happy to support this adjustment. Thank you.
With that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 7.4, contract variation, Eastern Cell.
Thank you, councillors. Through you, Mr Mayor. This one is a fairly straightforward one. It has been discussed and debated by council previously, so I'm anticipating some discussion. However, as the Mayor mentioned earlier on in today's meeting, we are redeveloping or developing a new Eastern Cell at Bonwick Road. That contract was established on a 70% design basis, which meant that there was always going to be variations to the contract. Some latent site conditions and some additional work that the Department of Environment have requested us to do have brought forward some of those variations. There is a concern from the officers that the variations will exceed, we know they will exceed the limit that councillors have put on this for the CEO to have delegated approval to approve the variations. Originally, the resolution for the construction of the Eastern Cell suggested that the CEO was delegated to do anything required to implement the contract. However, a former resolution of council limited that variation response to 5% of the contract cost. It is clear, because this one is a 70% design, that those variations could be higher. We anticipate the variations will definitely go above the 5. We know they will. And so we're seeking whether in this instance, and this instance alone at this stage, council would be willing to allow the CEO the delegated approval to take those variations to the 30%. That would remain within the overall approved budget for this project, but would allow the project to proceed in a timely fashion. If we don't have that additional variation for the CEO, we may be required to return to council, either at a special meeting or at a normal ordinary meeting, and that would create potential time delays on the project, which would impact our viable airspace, but it would also create time delay variations in the contract itself, costing council money. So it's not a best value proposition to necessarily continuously report back to council, and it would be better with this type of contract to allow the CEO a higher delegated authority. We understand councillors have concerns about that and may wish to discuss that, but we felt that it was prudent and particularly relevant for officers that in order to do our job to the best of our ability, we needed to ask that question. That's what this report seeks. take it as read, and Ms Stengel and I are here to answer any questions that may arise from that. We do feel it is relevant to say that the variations that have been received so far would have been received by any contractor and are not related to the original contract price. They are things that were essentially unknown. We discovered some buried waste at the site that required some additional work, and some changes in DES requirements required an upgraded sewer line, basically. Over to you, councillors.
Just before we begin the questions, I'd just like to see your intent to add an amendment to the recommendation, and on the end of that put in to all councillors.
Put in one second.
And require monthly reporting on variations approved to all councillors. So, yeah, just add to all councillors.
I thought it was coming to meetings.
What's that?
I thought that motion said it was going to come to a meeting, so it's public. I assume.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we can do both. It doesn't make any difference.
Well, the recommendation there seeks the CEO to have approval to do 30% up to 30% variation, and require monthly reporting on the variations approved. And if council goes with that recommendation, I would like to see it add to all councillors. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Devereux.
Thank you. Through the Mayor. You're saying it's within budget, this variant. Now, according to my handy little calculator here, it's nearly 1.2 million. It's 1.184. That is a 30% increase on it. So it's a lot. Obviously, how does that fit within the budget for the project? Is that like next year's figures, or?
Through you, Mr Mayor, this is not a single variation. It's the ability to sign off on variations as they occur to the budget level for this project. So that is this year's budget and next year's construction budget as it may occur. We'd have to validate that through the budget process. But yeah, it would just be allowance to spend to the budget level without bringing the variations back to council.
So if we've got a budget there for it, is what's missing out, if you know what I mean? Because normally a budget is very specific for these things. So is there other stuff which will be put off, I guess?
The budget, the tender was on a 70% design. So the tender didn't include everything that may be utilised or undertaken to complete the project. We have a budget. Do you want to do it's like 3.5? Yeah, no, we don't do this. Yeah. We have a fixed budget, which is a total amount, and at this stage we've committed to a tender amount that is significantly less than that. As we progress through that process of constructing this, we will get variations which will add on to that original tender amount until we get to the budget level. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm just wondering what the breakdown was of that 3.5, and if there's anything that's going to be, you'd be coming back and saying that we spent that money on this, so therefore we need more for that.
We're not anticipating that through you, Mr Mayor, at this time. Yeah, the annual current budget is 3.5. And yeah.
Yeah, that's fine then, if that's the case.
Yeah.
Any other questions, councillors? We'll go Councillor Smerdon and Councillor Waldock.
So you said some of the extra things was an extra weighbridge, so we didn't count on having an extra weighbridge originally, or?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I can let Ms Stengel answer that, but it's all to do with the DES requirement.
All to do with DES requirements?
So through the chair, and so the additional weighbridge is not just DES requirement, well, yes, DES requirements, so Department of Environment and Science requires us to capture all movements to site, including non-waste. So the infrastructure needed to develop the cell is considered a non-waste item. So they're quite strict around those reporting requirements. We can still do that through our weighbridge. However, at peak times, we would be experiencing high volume in traffic, and they were things like concrete trucks and the like coming into the cell would be on a time and potentially up to, my understanding, quite substantial, significant financial variation if they have to be delayed or wait in the queue. So we've looked at a few different approaches on how we can manage that, and it was determined that a second, not a temporary weighbridge, but a relocatable weighbridge would be an option for us. And when we looked at the idea of hiring one for a 6-month period versus purchasing one, the benefits of purchasing are quite clear. It's much of a muchness. So that was one of the variations we're seeking to keep us compliant with the department, as well as, I guess, provide us with that operational flexibility and keep the costs down. And that's part of that.
So the sewer line is extra as well? We didn't know the sewer line was there when we did the 70% quote?
Yes, so through the chair, yes. So the sewer line, the additional extension to the sewer line was a variation to the current contract to future-proof that sewer line up the side of Bonnet Road. If we hadn't have done the works now, we would have had to retrofit that sewer line after the cell's built, which would be probably near impossible to get approval. So we were always going to use the sewer line as part of our design. We will be installing a leachate pump and quite a significant culvert in that location, and that was also part of the design that wasn't quite fleshed out through the 70% design, because we needed to do additional works in that space to understand the fall and the grade. So the additional, so I guess picture-proofing that section of sewer line was additional to the original scope. So that was one thing that we hadn't foreseen, but for the future for Gympie region, it will clearly provide assurance about that line. So and also no cost in the future. We don't have to go back and dig up the cell. So.
And Ms. Dangle, just to clarify, it's not that staff missed that the sewer line needed to be upgraded. It's that it wasn't included in the original tender. So in terms of our budget, staff knew that that sewer line had to be upgraded. They put an allocation into the budget. When they went out to tender, because the final engineering on that pipeline hadn't been completed, that wasn't part of the tender pricing, but there was an allocation in the budget to deal with that issue. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, to answer that question, that's exactly the answer. It's not. I guess maybe the report doesn't perhaps convey that as well. The variations to date are nothing to do with misunderstandings of design or incompetence through any of the procurement process or anything like that. It's absolutely finalising those pieces of work, which unfortunately do take additional resourcing sometimes. For example, we've got additional quality control happening right now to go through all of the material we've got so that we can expedite the sign-off at the other end of the cell when it's completed. So there's a number of variations that are coming forward and absolutely nothing to do with the current design. Just additional, I guess design work really. It does take a bit of work to get that right. And as Mr. Burns alluded to, we have unfortunately found some additional, just a couple of hot spots that we weren't anticipating, and unfortunately that required additional investigation and making sure that we've covered that off to make sure the cell's stable and meets requirements.
So I guess it's just because contract variations have always been a contentious discussion point given this council's history. It's not a blowout. It's simply that we went out and we got a price for 70% of the work effectively. There are other aspects to the work that required extra design, and rather than hold up the process because of the pressure that we're under with the Bonnet Road airspace and the need to have an eastern cell approved and work started, we went through the tender process on the broad majority of the work with the view that we would deal with these issues that were acknowledged, recognised, priced and accounted for in the budget, and deal with them after the contract had been awarded to expedite the development of the cell. Is that a correct understanding?
That's great. Yep, that's absolutely a great summary. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a very well explained summary, Mr. Mayor. And instead of coming back for a bunch of 5% to meet that 30%, we're just saying, can we get some of the values, particularly the weighbridge, are outside of the 5%, which would require an extra meeting. So to expedite that and reduce the risk of additional time variation, delays and cost, we're seeking support for the CEO to have a slightly larger allowance, but it would still be under the budget. If the budget ever came to a blowout situation, we would be required to come back here and share that with councillors, but we don't anticipate that at this time.
I think it's great, the staff in this space have really burnt the candle at both ends to facilitate an exceptional outcome for our residents. The concept, or especially the cost involved in putting in a truck and taking it to Ipswich or Maryborough, would have such a financial impost on our ratepayers that it's scary to contemplate. So I can understand the desire to get the ball rolling in the unknown space in terms of the 70%, and deal with the relatively knowns as they sort of crop up. I know it's a different process that council would normally undertake, but we were sort of between a rock and a hard place, and staff have done a great job in this area. So if you can pass that on to the team, Mr Burns and Ms Stengel. I know they've had a couple of interesting years in the waste arena, particularly given the floods and what they inherited when they took over that role. So just to get us to here has been a tremendous outcome from the team. Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Waldock?
Moment of silence. I think the question, lead deficiency. I think the question's already been answered, but I'll ask it anyway. The variation, so this is the customer variation, not the contractor variation, right? That's clear? Yeah.
Yes.
So unforeseen extras like that could benefit the contract overall. That's what it's all about. Yep.
That's through the chair. Absolutely, that's in summary. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
In summary, yeah.
But this to date, most of it has been council led, or through maybe some design requirements. We've had to go and purchase some slightly different material or something like that we weren't anticipating. So.
Yep.
They're improving customer responsiveness at the gate and servicing at the gate by making sure it's nothing's slowed down, and they're future proofing in terms of the sewer and some of the other work that's ongoing.
And the only reason why I was clarifying that is if we're doing a 30% contractor variation, contractors got speak 30% I can play with. But yeah.
Any other questions, councillors? We have a recommendation. Councillor Mill.
I'm just clarifying the amended. It's just reporting to variations to be reported to all councillors.
Yes.
I'm just wanting to clarify, does that mean it's coming to council? The original recommendation, I thought it was coming back to council on monthly reporting. This just means we get the information that doesn't go public. What's the intent?
The intent is to keep councillors abreast of any changes or any expenses in that area.
So can it be to council?
Sorry?
Through you, Mr Mayor, if I may, we can put those variations in the quarterly report, the one I've just presented, or even on which we would do. We could bring them monthly as part of a procurement report, and we can also email councillors. So there would be a number of avenues.
I was happy with councillors receiving an email. Okay. There's enough work going on in this space. I'm happy if councillors just get an email to understand what's happening. So if there is a question from the community member, they can answer it. And also we can keep an understanding of what the variations relate to in that as well. I don't want anything official, just an email.
Oh, that just goes to my question, is it public information or is it now internal information? That's more the question. I just understood it as in it was going to come back to a public forum at some stage. That's just saying it's not. That's just my question. So.
Well, I think any of this information is generally highlighted in quarterly reviews. So I'd rather just leave it for the quarterly review, have councillors get the timely information every month so that we're abreast of everything, and then it be dealt with in a normal process. I wouldn't be encouraging extra work and extra reports for our meetings.
I'm just ensuring anything that, it can be made public information moving forward, that's all. Just because it's such a large variation.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Whatever's required. Happy to.
Look, it's not your standard situation. We're effectively we allocated a contract for a certain amount of work to be done. We knew there was extra work to be done, but with the desire for expediency and a necessity for expediency, we went about it this way. when you use the words contract variation, it sounds like we are spending 30% more than we had intended. We're not. There's 30% work that needs to be done that wasn't tendered for in the original quote. You might get a quote to build a house. You have factored in 30 grand to do the landscaping, but you have that as a variation at the end of the job, which is effectively what we're doing here. Our staff have been on point with the numbers in terms of the cost. We just went out for a smaller size contract to get the ball rolling so we could be in that cell as soon as possible. So it's not the same sort of, it's not a normal contract variation scenario. Are councillors happy with that change, that we receive an update every month? Yep. We have a recommendation there, councillors. There's someone to move. Councillor Stewart, someone to second. Councillor Waldock. Councillor Stewart to speak.
Mr Mayor, you would be the one moving that because you have the amendment.
Happy to move. Councillor Stewart, second. I've said enough. Councillor Stewart, you want to speak?
Mr Mayor, about 4 years ago we had this argument about how much authority we gave to the CEO in terms of varying account contracts. It was 5%, but at the time it was always said that there could be exceptions that could be included in this sort of way, and I think this is one of those special times when an exception is appropriate, and so I'm happy to second.
Speakers for the recommendation. Any speakers against? Yeah, the speakers for. Councillor Mill.
This variation was always flagged. It was flagged in the original report. It was flagged in a procurement panel report. We always knew it was coming up, so it is one of those exceptions to the 5% rule, and I'm happy that this, the way the motion is, as long as we have the information come back public on those variations at some stage, I'm happy to support this motion going through.
Any other speakers for or against? Close. All this we're doing is allocating funding for an expense that we knew existed. It just happens to be outside the contract scope, so it appears to us as a contract value extension. I would encourage councillors to support this recommendation as it will allow for appropriate timing in terms of changes that need to be made, and support the staff that have done an amazing job to get us to this point. It cannot be underestimated or underappreciated the time frame that our staff operated in with the Department of Environment to make this this eastern cell, come to life. And the work that they have done will save the ratepayer millions of dollars in transportation. And, from a small team in an office in one of our buildings, the good work that they've done has saved ratepayers millions of dollars in transporting waste outside our region. So while it may not be a sexy industry, failure to do diligent work in this space ends up costing ratepayers a lot of money. And this team came in and they picked up a hand grenade and they've dealt with it and diffused it and got a great outcome for the region. And I'd ask councillors to support this recommendation to assist our staff in doing the wonderful work that they've achieved. With that, we'll go to vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 8.1, flood hazard update. Councillor Milne, have you had any determination?
Mr. O'Byrne? Did we have? No.
Councillor, my suggestion would be...
Underclare.
That's potential, but
Yeah. I don't know, I haven't seen the mapping. It just says if you're unsure, declare, so...
You've got a declaration, Councillor Milne?
I apologise, I don't have one written. Councillor Jess Milne, I believe I may have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter due to property that I own in Tin Can Bay, which may be captured under this. I'm not quite sure if it is or isn't, so I'm not quite sure what the actual declaration is, because it could affect my property. I've sought advice, I'm not quite sure if I should leave or stay.
I think you're allowed to have
Yeah, it's town plan.
It's not town planning though, it's not.
Well, I'm not like.
It's a building, it could financially impact future actions on that.
If you don't know if you're affected by this, then you don't know if you have a conflict.
I'm unsure.
If you know you're affected by this flood mapping, then you have a conflict. If there's no evidence to suggest that you are affected by this mapping, then you don't have a conflict.
I'm a lower
You
line.
can operate on the facts that you have in front of you, and if you don't have those facts, in my opinion, there's no conflict.
Well, I'm going to declare a conflict of interest on the unknown and I am unsure. It says if you are unsure, declare, but I'm going to call it declarable conflict of interest because I am unsure, but I have a doubt. However, I believe I can consider the matter because it is region-wide and there's 4 matters. I don't believe it's prescribed, but I could be wrong. But on the information provided now, I don't know. So I'm unsure. It's hard.
Mr Mayor,
I don't know if I should leave or not. That's what it comes down to.
Mayor, well, if it's declarable, we can decide, so.
But it may be prescribed if it's an impact on my particular property, because if it's a building thing, it could be a cost-related thing to if I put a building application in. That's my unknown.
We'll just hear from Ms Hatch.
Councillor, I just think that if you're unsure, you can go because as a role of a councillor, you should if it's about building scheme or things in general that occurs to everyone in the community, there's no conflict. But if you have a special interest in that area and if you are unable to delineate between your role as a councillor and you as a person, then if you're unsure about that, then I suggest that you do declare a conflict and leave.
I'll declare that I have a conflict of interest in this matter during impact on my property in Tin Can Bay, and I'll choose to leave the meeting for this item. Thank you.
Can I just ask, we vote on a number of things that can affect our properties, but this is it's still a general thing. It's not specifically, I would be comfortable if she stayed, but.
Well, I agree with you, Councillor Derry, she's left, and I mean, the council isn't aware whether this affects her property or not.
Yeah.
So, based on the information she has,
I do understand playing.
No conflict. To leave the room, so we'll just.
Very unfortunate.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Byrne, Mr. Watson, floor yours.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. A fairly straightforward matter which we've actually already workshopped through with councillors. Reports in front of you. Take this as read unless there's any questions.
Any questions, councillors? Been through this a few times. Councillor Smurd.
I asked the same question I asked last time. Will this affect present properties and make some of those uninsurable or affect their insurance greatly?
So, in terms of the current flooding information we have available, if they're already within the extent of the flood mapping, then essentially it will be an adjustment to that mapping. We do have new information across areas where we have not had studies before. They would have been covered by broader flooding information, which means, from my perspective, you've now got greater certainty on the flood impacts on your property. Therefore, you should get a greater determination from the insurer on that issue, because at the moment it's a very broad plan that is produced by the state government for flood mapping. So now we will have actual flood information. So you should get some more certainty there. I can't comment on the situation per property, but that information is there now and can be used.
But what we used to have was 1 on 100 heaviest, we're going less than that, are we not?
No.
Agree?
No, we're not going less. We've got more information. So previously, for catchments like the Wide Bay Creek, no information. So we've had to use state government information to make those determinations. And I can't talk on behalf of the insurers, but if they didn't have information, well, then they would use that same provided information. We now have the data, so there's greater certainty of what happens in that area. Therefore, they can make better judgments on that. And depending on what situation it is, I guess it will fall the way the insurer determines.
But what this is actually based on is speculation of what's going to happen in the next so many years. If climate change is
Yep. So in terms of the future climate, yes, the future climate is based on a forecast to 2100, using the available information today to make that judgment. The future climate scenario we've used is sort of a mid-range scenario. So we haven't gone for the most conservative solution, and we haven't ignored it altogether either. So
it will increase levels.
It will.
That's science.
In the areas where we've already got the mapping, where there was no mapping previously, you've now got new information.
But where we did have the mapping, it will increase the flood levels.
Generally, yes, and that's what we worked through in the workshop. Yep.
And in Gympie, a town like Gympie, that will affect a lot of homes.
Councillor Waldorf.
In a nutshell, through the chair. Just to clarify, what you're saying is this is based on past statistics and you're following a trend analysis of where the floods were and where it's heading. Yeah.
So the selection of the flood events is statistical. So
exactly.
It doesn't take into account previous flood events as the sole contributor, though, because if you look back on our history, we haven't had a 1 in 100 year event within the Mary River catchment, but we have had events that have exceeded that as well. So, but yes, statistical for both the future climate, all the maths around the future climate scenarios, yes.
Based on facts of history.
It is.
That might get us into the philosophical realm there. Councillor Wardock, I think there's mapping that's done based on data that has been collected and people's interpretation of that data, and they produce a result at the end.
Through yourself, Mr. Mayor, if I can probably just elaborate on that. I mean, what we're presenting is actually based around the most current data, the most current methodologies from analysis point of view, so the most accurate projections that can be made at the current time. It's basically that then has led to the remapping.
Councillor Smurden.
Is it a state requirement that we go down this road, is it?
It is, yes. So in the report, we've covered off on the state planning policy. Obviously, what we're talking about today is happening ahead of the planning scheme review, but as part of that project, which as that evolves, that information will come across, we do have to comply with the state planning policy, and there are certain items in there where they say we must align with and consider future climate for resilience of the community. So.
Any other questions, councillors? Recommendations there before us. There's someone to move. Councillor Devro, someone to second. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Devro to speak.
I hate this because you just know it's going to cause pain to some people, and that's not something that I don't think anyone in this room wants to do. The other side of it is, though, it will help people make decisions on which properties they purchase. You just have to follow the best science at the time and statistics to give what we think is a fair result. And I think this, given the information that we've been presented with, this is a fair result for both the homeowners and the future homeowners in the area. It's just, I feel for the people if this negatively affects them, but we have to go forward. And the responsible thing to do is to accept it.
Councillor Stewart.
I've had constituents contact me about land where they're no longer allowed to build houses, or they have to build the house really high, and they bought the land before there were changes 20 years ago, whatever it was, and it was really difficult for them. But on the other hand, we also need to be responsible in terms of ensuring flood resilience and ensuring that we're not endangering emergency services in trying to save people who have built in places where it floods. The mapping insurance companies will make their own decision on the maps that they use, and they won't necessarily use the maps that we produce. While they may look at the maps that we say and the rules that we make, they will make their own decisions on their own mapping And they have to look at the statistics, they have to look at what's happened in the past, they have to look at what payouts they've made, and so on. So we can't be tied totally to the insurance question. And the third point is that human-induced climate change, and I used to be a bit of a sceptic, but it was predicted 150 years ago, and the evidence just keeps building. So it needs to be taken into account. Sure, predictions are always faulty, there's no issue with that, but things are heading in the direction that's been predicted for 150 years. So, for that reason, I am happy to second this recommendation.
2 speakers for the recommendation. Any speakers against? Councillor Smurden.
I disagree with Councillor Stewart. I don't think there are too many insurance companies that have flood mapping for the whole of Australia, so I think they will be following our flood mapping to some degree. But anyway, that's the nature of the beast.
Any other speakers for or against? Councillor Devereux to close.
Nothing more to add.
With that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Stewart, Councillor Baldock, Councillor Hartwig, Councillor Devereux. Against? Councillor Jensen, Councillor Smurden. The motion is carried. Item 8.2, Return Service League of Australia, Queensland Branch, Gympie Sub-Branch Incorporated, proposed lease of 39 Lakeland Street, Gympie. I'll hand over to you, Mr O'Byrne. And
Thanks, just a minute. I'll just wait for Mr French to join us. So Mr French saunters in. Thanks, councillors. So this report is actually brought to you further to a workshop that was in August. And look, I will note that at that workshop, we took away from that workshop that consideration was to be considered for in relation to the status of future planning for the CBD area. And the status, of course, is that we haven't actually consolidated anything to date. And that has been reflected in the recommendation as far as the lease term is concerned. So we'll take the report as read, but if you'd like to have any questions.
any questions, councillors? Councillor Jensen.
It says here in the conclusion that a long-term lease, 10 years, or a minimum of 5, and yet it says here term of lease 3.
Yes, through the chair. The instructions from that council meeting was that it would have come back with a 3-year term.
We decide that.
So it's through yourself, Mr. Mayor, if I can just clarify. So councillor, yeah, look, the conclusion, if you actually read the conclusion, it's actually stating what the club is actually seeking and would like, and they would like a 10-year lease. And indeed, the discussions have said that the club is not likely to consider a lease less than 5 years. Further to the workshop we had, we're actually coming back with a recommendation of a 3-year lease based on the fact that further planning needs to be undertaken in relation to the CBD area and where we head with that. Totally up to yourselves as councillors, a longer term than 3 years if you consider that appropriate.
Councillor Jensen.
Through you, Mr Mayor. I thought we had agreed on a peppercorn lease of 120 a year. Have we not?
Sorry, on that, I don't recall a discussion for this particular matter in regards to peppercorn lease. The $400 per week in this case has been based on what council's recently agreed on for the Waruna lease, noting that the RSL is a group that have paid officers funds from other sources, and
This is the sub-branch though.
and yes. Well, that's my understanding was that
CEO has raised a relevant point. We had this discussion, I believe, in a briefing, didn't we, around? And there's probably a few questions that need to be asked.
Are they on the table?
Maybe we need to move this one in committee to ask the questions. councillors feel?
You have a reason to move into committee.
What's that?
You have to have a reason to move into.
Well, we're already discussing another, Mr French has already highlighted the lease of another organisation. We probably want to talk about the RSL's work that they will do, their finances. I mean, it's a consideration we need to have. We should consider it rather than just throw it under the table.
Yeah, I don't want to lay it.
If
On the table.
not lay it on the table, move it to our next, to be dealt with in committee. We need to think about it before we walk forward. If we're comfortable walking forward, then we can walk forward, but I think it's a relevant point the CEO has raised. Councillor Milne?
Mr Mayor, we have to have a legislative reason to move into committee. We just can't move anything into committee because we want to talk about it in committee. I'm just clarifying what that reason would be.
Well, I can give you one. We've already had discussions in this open forum that were held in a briefing. So there's already a breach right there and then.
What do you, I don't understand what you mean.
Statements have been made in relation to conversations that occurred in the briefing. And briefings are confidential. So, if we can proceed along this path without making reference to the briefing discussions, then we can do it in this forum. If we can't move forward without making reference to statements that were made during the briefing, which is confidential, then we will have some challenges.
Yeah.
But that happens with a lot of stuff that we've got, doesn't it?
Not generally, no. When people are, when
staff have actually responded on, you've spoken about that, we've talked about that, and they're referring to a briefing. So, how's that?
Well, but they generally refer to a workshop. So if the discussions are had in a workshop, those discussions are public. If they're had in a briefing, they need to remain confidential.
Of the workshop.
We can wade our way through this in the open forum. I think councillors just need to be very aware that if we're going to make a statement or a statement wrapped up in a question, that we're mindful of the fact that this was discussed in briefing and that we don't make reference to any statements that may have been made. I know there's no intent on any individuals, but not everyone has the same position of heart in the community. Councillor Milne?
Mr Mayor, I'm just wanting to ask a question on, it says 39 Monkland Street, and it says in the very part of, I'm just clarifying that the buildings that we're discussing are the buildings at what we call the old Telstra shop area and not Savage Boxing itself, because Savage Boxing has their own tenure till 2026, and then I believe that's a recommendation was lining up with that type of tenure. And so I'm just, I'm just clarifying that we're not talking about the Savage Boxing Centre because they have their own tenure. And what area are we actually talking about? Is it the car park? I'm just wondering where the line is. Or is there shared use area in there proposed?
Without having a survey area in front of me, it would be that extra Telstra building and a portion of the car park adjacent. It does not include the gymnasium. That's under a separate lease, and the 3-year lease works in with the extent of that lease.
Thank you.
I have a question in relation to the 400 a week. You made reference to Warona, Mr French, who receive considerable federal government funding for the services that they provide. They do a wonderful job facilitating that in our community. How is that similar to the veterans services and community work that the sub-branch would like to do in this facility that doesn't receive funding from a government source?
The officer that wrote the report based that on the understanding that there's paid staff in that organisation other than volunteers, community, as a sale hall committee might add. So based on more recent, as I understand it, more recent decisions by councils put there.
I don't think your decisions would have been based around paid staff when a community organisation, particularly is performing a function. For me, it's more about, you know, where is the funding coming from? Is it effectively a commercial entity, and Rowona is, you know, one of those that sort of competes in that commercial space with other service providers. What the RSL, or my understanding of what the sub-branch here is intending to do, is to provide services for veterans and others that may be homeless, may need some physical or mental wellbeing services, may need some accommodation, and this would be a place to facilitate that organisation. So I sort of I understand the staff, you know, their take on it, but I would, I'll be foreshadowing an amendment in regards to that space, because I think what the RSL sub-branch would like to do there is very, very different to what effectively community organisations that provide a commercially funded service do.
Sorry. Mr. Mayor, if I can just make the comment here. Look, from a council officer's point of view, we've put forward a recommendation based around, you know, I suppose our independent view, entirely up to yourselves as councillors to make those community-based judgment calls and decisions as to what you think is appropriate. No issue at all.
Is there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Baldock?
Speaking from probably the only one on the board here that's a returned serviceman. I've done my time defending Australia. There's places for our soldiers to go, which is, you know, the DVA, Department of Veteran Affairs. They pay full amount for rent, lease, in a shop down there next to the subways. This is the RSL sub-branch, which is fed off of poker machines and grog liquor licences, multi-million-dollar organisation, and we're looking at a reduced lease, or should we be looking at a full lease, because they will pay accordingly. There's ways they make money, and to put an organisation into a flooded, vulnerable area, it goes against our responsibility as building resilience within the community.
Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Milne?
I'll probably direct to you, Mr. Mayor, because you seem to have understanding. Now, are they proposing, the RSL proposing an additional service to what they already do, or are they just wanting to move a service to these buildings?
I don't have the detail on exactly what they intend to do here. I've got the report just as you have. I am aware of the services that they provide at the moment, and it is quite extensive in the work that they do for returned servicemen and women. And my view is that if this facility assists them in that space to extend that footprint and that service, you know, through the region, and as the report states, they're wearing all the cost. I'm very happy to support them in the work that they do, but I guess I don't have any more information than you do. Councillor Deborah?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, have we approached them about us selling the property rather than... I mean, the way I'm thinking is I would rather demolish those properties like we planned, because it gets properties out of a flood area. But have we approached them about if they took it over in that respect, if they actually purchased it off their ratepayer?
Yes, the purchase has been discussed in negotiations, and the preferred option is the lease.
Lease with an option to buy, or?
There's always an option to buy, isn't there?
I think that like the option to dispose of the property would be something we would always consider. I think at this point in time they would like to move their facility, their services there, and start that process. and you know, they may consider purchasing it down the track. I think if we're going to shift every building that's in a flood area, we're going to have a lot of grass to mow around Gympie, and it's just one of the challenges of having a building space in our region is that for some of them it's going to get wet, and if tenants go into council-owned properties with eyes wide open, as I believe the sub-branch are, and they're willing to bear those costs and save the ratepayer money. I mean, it serves a great purpose for not only the RSL but also Savage Boxing, who, that club is growing all the time. They provide a strong community service there for particularly, young men and women that may not fit into another sporting arena. I know one young man went down there and lost a lot of weight so he could enter the defence force. So that space, I know, was, we had a master plan and it was earmarked for other things, but without purchase of the neighbouring property, I think those plans are basically, probably you could expect that they would be dead in the water, because there's a large parcel of land that hasn't been acquired by council, and I don't think we have the funds to acquire it anyway. And as a short-term measure of 10 years, we're gonna, if council chooses to leave it there, we basically let the spiders and the cockroaches inhabit it until we squirrel away the funds, the significant amount of funds to knock it over. Then we've got to redevelop it, and then we've got to maintain it without knowing where we want to head in that space. I think it's a good, effectively a short-term interim measure of 10 years to get to see this happen. But Councillor Jensen?
As far as council calendars go, 10 years isn't that much.
It's a short term.
It's like 10 minutes, really.
Yes.
It really is. And the multi-millions that you were talking about, Councillor Walder, is what will be invested to save our ratepayers money on a building, because we haven't got the money to knock down any buildings. The Mayor said, they'll sit there for ages, rotting, horrible. We haven't got the money to blow on it. 10 years, let the RSL blow the dough. I think it's a service to our veterans, the people who have served for us, and council can help that.
So are you going to, I think we've had enough discussion. Would you like to make a...
Do you want me to make an amendment? This will take a long time.
Councillor Jensen's making an amendment. Councillor Mill?
Oh, I just have another question.
You have a question, do you?
Yeah, just, we are entering a bit of debate here, but I do have a question. We've got a proposed 3-year term here to match up with an existing lease that we have on the same block. Within that 3 years, is it proposed to have a master plan that could be utilised for the area that we do own? We do not own, and I'm not foreseeing acquiring the other land that was for the other master plan, but I thought we're doing a larger Mary Street plus surrounding areas which can involve this area. So within 3 years we would have potentially a plan or options of plans to do with this area where it could be utilised to maximise our assets for the greater Mary Street Memorial Park area. Is that possible in 3 years?
Through yourself, Mr Mayor, I might pass it to the CEO. We have actually got a budgeted amount to actually undertake at least some preliminary concept work.
Through the Mayor, the work is commenced. We've got on with collating a number of reports that we're looking at now. We're in the process of doing that to say these are the CBD sort of revitalisation work we've been planning for, so that we're not losing information we've had, and beyond that, we're in that space only now.
Councillor Smoot?
Those plans would be quite some time away, would they not?
Yes, there's a few steps along the way.
And then we've got to come up with the money to actually implement those plans.
Yes,
which could be quite a few.
a staged approach, and it might take some time.
Councillor Jensen, you wish to make an amendment?
So on recommendation 2, A, change the term of lease to 10 years. B, the rental, B, the usual peppercorn lease. How much is that? 121 a year, something like that, whatever that is. Whatever that is. 128, I think.
Yeah.
128 per year. Whatever that amount
Shall I
is.
just remove the value and put peppercorn?
Sorry?
Whatever the fees are.
It might insult the ratepayer too much.
Yeah,
I think that's.
we'll understand there's standard fees for a community group. That cover it.
This is for veterans' mental health.
Yeah. So if you just,
Is that what it says?
community
Veteran
groups and just
care centre.
and just get rid of the rest of it.
I think it's just gone up to 130.
130, I think it is.
Yeah.
Whatever that
Thank
is.
you. Is there anything else,
Is that
Councillor
right?
Jensen?
I think that's. Hate these glasses.
So you've got your 10-year lease. You have the standard fees for community groups.
Use is the same. Insurance is the same.
Yeah.
Well, the standard.
Yeah. Everything else is
All right.
standard.
Okay,
You happy with that, Councillor?
I am.
Councillors, we have a recommendation there. Councillor Jensen has moved. Is there someone to second?
You've got to move recommendation 1 to do recommendation 2.
We have to vote on the amendment first.
Oh.
Well,
Got to
And
approve
that
this.
incorporates recommendation 1.
it's the whole thing.
There's 2 recommendations, that's all, you haven't incorporated.
Can we just get rid of the line recommendation 2 and put them all into one?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Just go, the line recommendation, that word, just remove that. Yep, that's it. And it becomes one full recommendation.
Is that right? That other than by tender or auction, is that still okay to be in there?
Because that we're just removing.
Yeah.
I've scribbled all over my page now.
So we have a recommendation there, councillors, while they're doing the administrative, I'll get Councillor Jensen to speak.
This is a community service that we give to our returned soldiers. They defend us. I'm happy to look after them when they come back, and if this is a little bit that we can do to help them, I move that we adopt this recommendation.
Councillor Smeaton.
Okay, Councillor Jensen. Also stress the point that the RSL will be responsible for this building. They will have to make the building more flood resilient and maintain it. It's just sitting there empty at the moment, so as far as I can see, it's a win-win for council.
2 speakers for the recommendation. Any speakers against? Councillor Waldock.
Rightio, the RSL and our veterans, they're there because of the federal government. It's a federal government's responsibility, and that comes in with our 10% GST taxes. We already pay a tax. It is their responsibility. What happens in the war scenes or in their services is their responsibility. So if they, they're responsible for the PTSDs and the what do you call it? Yeah. Anyway, anything that happens after the fact of war is the federal government's responsibility. We're already paying for it. So why should the local Gympie ratepayer pay for something that the federal government has incorporated or responsible for? A peppercorn lease to a multi-million-dollar organisation, where it's a federal government, I think it's just an insult on the ratepayer. We've got our own responsibilities. The rates and rubbish and roads, and looking after our Defence Force personnel, return services, it's not in it. I'm sorry. It's already covered by the feds.
Any other speakers for or against? Councillor Melton.
Against. Look, I think the RSL do have a function in the community and they do an absolutely fantastic job. I have concerns on this whole area being given to community groups in general. because it's flood risk pretty much. There was an interest, for this, obviously proposed for this property by the RSL put forward. I was comfortable with a 3-year to align with a lease that we've already got in place down in that facility or that area, to allow council to come up with a longer term option that will master in with a lot of other plans. I hesitate giving any lease to a floodable property to an organisation, but they have indicated that they will be taking on the building insurance and things like that. However, if we do get some more floods, they've indicated they'll be giving it back as well. So that, it still is a risk that we could end up with the buildings back. I was comfortable with the 3-year lease. I'm not comfortable with a 10-year lease because it's locking us into a community group that could be flood affected. We don't have the option now to do anything else with those buildings because it has been disposed of to another organisation. So that's why I'm not comfortable with the recommendation that's sitting here now for a 10-year lease. I was happy with a 3-year lease. So I'm not in favour of this recommendation as it sits.
Since we've had someone speak against it, I'll speak for the recommendation. If we're going to not renew leases to community groups that are in flood affected areas, effectively we are going to displace a massive amount of, as suggested by the councillor, we are going to displace a lot of community groups. The reality is that in Gympie there are portions of our community that flood, and community groups utilise that space 99% of the time, and that 1% it goes underwater. This lease to me is a win for council. While it sits there doing nothing, it deteriorates, it costs us money to manage, it costs our staff time and effort to look after, and the RSL have said, we'll take on all that obligation, we'll take on all that liability, we'll take on all that responsibility, and we'll make that building come alive, we'll make that area have some activity, and rather than being just a dead space in a very active part of town, it will make it an attraction and an opportunity for veterans to come and get some help. I think the reality is that, as much as I agree with Councillor Waldock, I think there's massive failings at a federal level in terms of support for our veterans. If we sit back and wait for the federal government to get their ducks in a row and have them swimming on the pond, many veterans will pass away. And the work that the RSL does in this space is absolutely essential, particularly for our region that has a high proportion of returned servicemen and women. Yes, they do run a business, absolutely. They employ a lot of people, and the profits from that business don't go to a major corporation where big CEOs get huge pay packets. That profit is put straight back into our community. And this lease, and approval of this lease, will allow an extension and a greater footprint in terms of the work that they can do to assist people that have defended our country. The reason we're sitting around this table today isn't because there was some miraculous, bubble of strength that kept invaders out of our country. It's because men and women chose to defend this nation and protect our democratic freedoms. And this is a small way that ratepayers can actually save money, because we don't have to knock the building over if the RSL are in there. They can provide a service that other government bodies can't provide or may not be able to provide, and make that space their own for the services that they provide. This is a business that has a philanthropic arm to it. They're not there to make profit for the sake of making profit. They're there to run a business that has some financial footings so they can take that profit and do philanthropic work with it within our community, particularly the veteran community. Without the RSL being in there, it will remain empty. Yes, there'll be a breeding opportunity for many spiders, cockroaches and other things, but it could be many, many years before council gets around to having the plans in place and more importantly, the finances in place on a priority basis to actually demolish this and redevelop it. And in that time, there's an opportunity for council to collaborate with the RSL. They have worked hard to get nearly $2 million worth of funding to upgrade Memorial Park. This is a community-minded organisation that wants to deliver not only to the returned servicemen and women, but also to the community. So I believe that, you know, in the time frame that the RSL are there, if this lease is approved, then as a council we should be working with them to look at that overall strategy and how we could collaborate with them with the funding that they can get and also the, you know, some profit from their business to develop that facility, not just for returned servicemen and women, but for the community. So I would encourage all councillors to support this lease. As Councillor Jensen pointed out, you know, 10 years is not a long time in local government, and there is a lot of work to be done in terms of that CBD plan. And then there's a lot of work to be done to get the money to actually do anything with it. And I think in reality, before any CBD upgrades encroached in that space, a decade will most likely pass. So I'd ask you all to support this recommendation and allow our returned servicemen and women a better chance for assistance. Any other speakers for or against? You've already spoken.
May I speak now?
Councillor Stewart?
My father was a returned serviceman and he was an engineer and builder. He didn't like floods. He always built above flood levels. He is also very community minded and forward looking. My concern with this is the time frame. I think if it was increased to 5 years, I would have been fine. In terms of the rent, council lose $20,000. In terms of our budget, that's nothing much. But to me, 5 years, we'll get our plans done and we'll be knowing what to do. We could then perhaps, if need be, extend the lease or whatever. But 10 years just seems too long, especially for property that does flood, a property which we have had plans for in the past and still considering what we're going to do with it. So I want to vote against this mainly because of the 10-year factor, not really for any other reason.
I think you've already spoken, have you, Councillor Ward?
Did you have a question? I'd like to speak for.
Yeah, go do it.
I think the challenge, Councillor Waldock, is that under the standing orders we're only supposed to speak once.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
You're the chair, and you.
Yeah.
Up to you.
So as much as
Trust me, I've been where
I know.
been where you are.
But it's all about faith. But whether you want to.
Yeah, as much as I am very flexible with our standing orders, I think we should just stick tight to them this time and just let you vote how you see fit. Yeah. Councillor Jensen to close.
I think there's been enough said. Let's go there.
With that, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation?
Amendment.
Of the amendment?
Yep. The recommendation, the amended recommendation, that's there. Councillor Waldock, Councillor Smerdon, Councillor Hartwig, and Councillor Jensen. Against, Councillor Milne, Councillor Stewart, and
abstain.
If you abstain, that's
a negative. I know.
Yeah. So the motion is carried. Thank you.
That was.
Councillors, that concludes our open portion of this meeting. We will take a small coffee break, and we'll probably return at say 12 o'clock for our in-committee items. Thank you.
Okay.